How's it going, folks? It's Thursday the 9th of April 2020 and this is the Irish Unity podcast. It's around about noon here. It's 9 p.m. in Australia, down under, and that brings me to our guest for this podcast, one Sean Matthews, lifelong political activist on the Irish scene. A lot of people will know of him. Moved down under to do construction work. Sean's a lifelong anarchist, libertarian, and trade unionist. He's a member of the Wobbly Union, International Workers of the World, and he's going to give his own perspective, anarchist perspective, libertarian perspective on the hopes, fears and opportunities that he sees within this COVID crisis. So with me on the line here from Sydney, Australia, down under, Sean Matthews. How you doing?
How you going, Kieran? Welcome to Australia, down under, mate.
Good man. Here, before we get too deeply into the politics, and I want to get into the dynamics of what we're facing into and hopes, fears and opportunities, just give the listeners a brief rundown of the situation down under and how the pandemic's panning out round there.
Yep. Well, I've been living here for the last few years. I'm currently working in one of the largest jobs in Sydney, one of the largest projects in Sydney as a construction worker. At the minute now, we have about 6,000 cases nationally, and we seem we seem to have flattened the curve as well compared to other places. It's just basically lucky that we are surrounded by ocean in Australia, and we've managed to kind of, for at the minute, escape the worst of it.
And what do you attribute that to? Because I mean, the pattern everywhere else in the capitalist world, you know, in Ireland's surrounded by water as well, and well, I don't know, it's to be seen how it pans out here, but you know, England's surrounded by water. England looks like it's on the verge of devastation. What did Australia do differently?
It seems to be a range of factors. One of the biggest factors for the big rise in Sydney was the Ruby Princess ship, because Australia is a harbour city, and that was responsible. The government, actually, the Liberal government we have here in a New South Wales, where Sydney is based, it was kind of like elsewhere. It was kind of delaying and waiting, and then it finally took advice from the health experts, and they closed the airports fairly quickly. They also have measures in place for anyone coming from abroad now, including Australian citizens. They're isolated in accommodation in hotels for 2 weeks. So there is no such thing as self-isolation.
Yeah.
If you're coming from abroad.
We've covered a lot of people who were interviewed Brian Leeson, Gary Donnelly, and different people about the hopes, fears and opportunities coming out of this, because the common theme is that capitalism, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, has exposed its inadequacies in a way that we in the left always knew were there, but capitalism's inadequacies have been exposed to the ordinary man through all of this, underfunding of the health service and all the rest. You mentioned to me a concern on, if I can refer to your tradition as the anarchist tradition, libertarian tradition. You mentioned a concern that was beginning to arise regarding extra powers that the state were assuming, or that the state could be expected to assume in all of this. Do you want to delve into that, Sean?
I think it's a very grey area. There's a kind of a state of emergency being issued here and elsewhere. It just remains to be seen whether it's temporary. According to the so-called health experts, I think it's important we actually abide by what they're saying. But I think in the future it's going to be testing whether these are just temporary measures, and whether this is going to kind of challenge the emergence of some type of revolutionary movement emerging from this latest pandemic. I also think the pandemic has to be put in perspective. Basically, we live in a world according to the International Labour Organization, about 2 million workers die every year due to work-related illnesses and the diseases. There's kind of like over 20,000 children die every day because they don't have access to clean water due to preventable diseases. So it's kind of interesting how they've basically declared this actually a pandemic. The whole system is basically sick from fucking top to bottom, and it's being exposed once again since the 2008 financial crisis. I also think we're living through another area of disaster capitalism, and basically what I mean by that, even from an Australian context, basically we've seen the government bail out kind of the biggest polluters on the planet. The airline industry was basically bailed out kind of 700 million, and then a couple of days later they sacked 20,000 of its workforce without pay. Yeah. So that's the kind of predicament we're living in, and the battle lines are going to be drawn.
Yeah, I mean,
we need to be ready.
Like the second, I'm sure you're aware of this guy, Simon Byrne, who's leading the cops over here now. He's an awful individual. You know, is in one of his many famous statements. Now he came out and he said, referring to Republicans, you know, he says, "We're coming for your kids. We're coming for your dole. We're coming for your house." Yeah. You know, and that guy meant it. Yeah. That guy meant it. He didn't mean to say it publicly, and I think he regretted saying it. Yeah. But that's how he feels, and that's how he got on. That's how it seems to be how he operated in England as well. Yeah. In regards to, when I heard that he was getting these extra powers, you know, the prospect of somebody like Simon Byrne being given just de facto a blank check,
de facto power. Yeah.
It was just in time. Yeah. Just in time for society to become very angry at the inadequacies of the state setup. You know, it's terrifying.
I think as well. Like I think once again we witnessed the social democracy coming the savior of capital. It's always the same. Kind of a lot of these reforms we're seeing. It's basically kind of they're fucking to save the system from fucking collapsing. We can't rely on the state or political parties to improve our life or change society. I was at a rally today. It was basically organised by all the trade unions here. It was a carnival rally under the May the 1st movement. It was kind of a joint amalgamation of the Maritime Union of Australia, which I have to say is an international union, which has also supported the Justice for the Craigavon too. Yeah. Along with my own union, the CFMEU, and the Wobblies, and also the United Workers Union. It's kind of the government here has basically we live in a free tier society. Basically, the government kind of looks after the so-called Australian workers and citizens, but kind of we got a latest wage subsidies bill of like 160 billion, but that was only geared towards Australian residents. But we have around 2 million temporary residents here who were basically left out of it. So basically, we organised a carnival rally today, upwards of 100 cars going around the Parliament and bleeping horns and kind of pointing out that no workers should be left behind from this crisis.
So workers are being left behind in Australia, you're saying?
And elsewhere, of course, it's the nature of the beast. There's kind of short-term things we all should be arguing for, whether it's in Australia and elsewhere, which is kind of income support for those who are out of work, regardless of their visa status, regardless whether immigrant or native worker or elsewhere. A worker's a worker.
Yeah.
And also we should be doing stuff like decriminalising squatting to provide shelter for homeless people.
Yeah.
That basically goes without saying.
See, that's the same theme. What you've just said there, that everybody who's come on to this podcast to talk about has spoke about the fact that the big capitalist lie, that idealism is impossible. The big capitalist lie that says, there's no magic money tree, there's no resources. That's all been exposed here because they've had to declare their hand and say, well, actually there is. There's lots of funding. There's lots of resources. We were just hiding it from you. And that's
and they always have billions for war, don't they?
They always,
and elsewhere.
They always do. Tell me this, Sean. Because obviously the theme, like, this podcast started in the middle of this pandemic, which is crazy. We were supposed to cover the topic of all things Irish unity, and now we're all epidemiologists and biologists, But what is the traditional, or if there is a traditional anarchist position, libertarian position? What is the libertarian position on Irish unity as we see it, as say Irish Republicans see it? I described you to Brian Leeson the other week as an anarchist within republicanism, if that makes any sense, which I know it doesn't. But like, what is the position there? Like, say, around the potential for border polls, national identity, if there is one, the importance of getting rid of partition. What's the anarchist position, or is there an anarchist position?
I would say, like, I come from a Republican background. The question we should be asking ourselves, especially around this crisis, is rather than the type of flag we live under, is what type of society we want to live under, because we're seeing from this pandemic, it's an international crisis and it requires an international response. And I don't think any state solution to this is going to solve it, or that is going to solve capitalism or any issues we face. I also think there's a bigger question at the heart of this, which I was listening to some of your interviews, or the last couple, is kind of the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, it's there in the background emerging. So I think personally I would defend the right of people to choose in terms of like what type of fucking government they want to live under. But that's their right to choose for self-determination. But I don't think it's a solution to capitalism or imperialism by any stretch of imagination. I think we have to look at kind of that kind of libertarian socialist tradition of, we need to kind of look at run our own lives, our communities and workplaces for our benefit, not the interests of bosses, no matter what colour of the skin or colour of the flag they live under.
Why do you think that tradition hasn't? Because I understand the draw of anarchism. I understand the benefits of reversing hierarchical organising, certainly within the revolutionary movement, and I understand that could and possibly should be applied to society. But what are there any models of government that we can look towards to show is maybe government's self-government? Are there any models of society that we can look towards and say that's what anarchism is proposing?
There certainly is historic examples. Never mind Spain. I'm sure yourself and your listeners have heard of the Spanish Revolution from 1936 to 39, whenever kind of upwards to 7 million workers took control of their workplaces and communities and factories. We also had a kind of a revolution within a revolution in terms of a revolution in the household. We had issues of social ecology, feminism come to the fore as well. We can also look at kind of the Russian Revolution, the early stages of the Russian Revolution. But I think more generally now, focusing on what we're going through now, we see ordinary people getting together in their local communities to organise life without the state. Yeah. Because I do think these mutual aid groups emerging, there are also mutual aid groups in Australia, Sydney as well, in local communities. I do think we shouldn't look upon them as a duty on kind of those of us subscribe from a revolution tradition as just temporary gap fillers for the neoliberal order. We need to look at them as kind of emergence of kind of a renewed revolutionary movement from below. That's what we should be looking at, these mutual aid groups. It's a chance for us, a glimpse of the future based on cooperation rather than profit.
There's no doubt there, because I've been blown away. And I'm doing this wee podcast from a wee shed out in my back garden, and in the past 2 weeks, you know what I mean, I've just been blown away by, hearing all around Ireland of mutual aid groups, grassroots groups who are ahead. You're saying existing outside of the state, they're ahead of the state. They were 3 weeks ahead of the state. Yeah. You know what I mean? They were. They've left the state behind.
Of course, it's always the case.
Yeah. Give us a few examples of down. Are there similar type of initiatives going on down in Sydney, down in Australia, Sean?
There are some similar initiatives, but it's kind of with the section of a few suburbs in Sydney, it wouldn't have the same type of community infrastructure as parts of Belfast. Like maybe in Belfast and other parts of the world, including the United States, I've kind of noticed that these mutual aid groups haven't just emerged out of a vacuum. They've came from previous struggles, whether it's through Occupy movement that's been there, they've been present. Yeah. So they're kind of able to grasp that opportunity.
Well, that's what Gary Donnelly was saying.
Kind of mould in the community.
Councillor Gary Donnelly made that point. Donzo said, he says we had the spade work already done. He says we were up and running before this pandemic even kicked in, because they'd already been doing it. Man, it's fascinating.
But I kind of think it's important to stress that we shouldn't see these as just temporary gap fillers as a charity phenomenon, but kind of some type of emergence of a movement that can kind of overturn the table and threaten the status quo.
Yeah, that's
in the future. When we basically get over this.
What's your predictions for when we get over this, Sean? What's your predictions for the class, just the whole class struggle, libertarian struggle, the trade union struggle? What are the opportunities, hopes, and fears?
There are at the minute, capital is weakened. Like if the Labour movement was in a position of strength, we could be making demands because globally capital is weakened. I think emergence from this, the big struggle is going to be around debt. Like Australia is now like in $1 trillion debt, United States, yourselves. So the question is going to be asked: who's going to pay for this debt? And of course, they're going to make us pay. Working class people pay. The poor pay. Homeless, the most marginalist, the most disadvantaged. So that's where the battle lines are going to be drawn, and that's where we need to kind of stand up to the mark and kind of ensure that we don't rely on political parties. We go the same route. The parliamentary path always leads in disempowerment, betrayals. We need to rely on ourselves as a class. We need to kind of renew them tools we have, which kind of, if you look back in the north of Ireland, civil rights, if you look back to other struggles recently around water charges, it wasn't relying on the political class, political parties, even trade union bureaucrats. It was relying on our tools of direct action and solidarity to kind of improve our lives in the here and now, and kind of give us a glimpse of the future where we can all kind of live in peace.
And that's
away from this rotten system.
That's the central theme of the anarchist message. Am I right?
That would be the central theme. We can't rely on others to do things. We have to act for ourselves.
It's probably made more sense in this environment than it has, in people's minds than for a long time. When are you coming home?
I'll see about that. I'm not too sure. I'm kind of at least there's work here for now anyway.
Yeah.
There's no work back here, and that was the main reason I moved in the first place. But I think again now we're going to go through an international recession, so who knows for the future? No matter where you can escape to, it doesn't matter these days.
Yeah, well, that's the benefit of being footloose and family free. God. Sean, that's brilliant.
Sometimes anyway. But as the old Irish saying goes, "Ní nart go leor le chéile."
Sin ceart. Gur míle maigad for sin. Agus chiefy me
Michael
who ar ball go lua tasú logum. Michael Orr, gur míle maigad slán. Slán.
Slán, here wife. Bye.